There's a kind of pain that doesn't scream. It doesn't break down in public or beg for attention. No, it sits quietly in the back of the room, unseen, unspoken, like a shadow that follows you everywhere. It's the pain that deep thinkers carry. The pain of noticing everything, of hearing what wasn't said, of feeling emotions that others have spent years running from. You know what I mean, don't you? You're sitting at a dinner table. The room is filled with laughter, gossip, small talk, weather updates, TV shows, weekend plans, and you play along until you say something real, something honest, not dramatic, just real. And suddenly the energy shifts. People stop laughing, someone clears their throat, another awkwardly changes the subject. Why does that happen? Because truth interrupts the performance. Let's be honest though, many times have you felt like your presence was too much for the room, even when you were silent? Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed that the more self-aware a person becomes, the more isolated they feel, not because they're broken, but because society is asleep. You begin to see through things, the fake smiles, the empty rituals, the systems that tell us how to live but never ask us what we feel, and you realize something terrifying. Most people don't want depth. They want comfort. They want agreement, not awareness. But here's the paradox, while the world praises surface level harmony, it's starving for truth. And that truth, it lives inside people like you. So what do you do with that pain, that clarity, that unbearable knowing? That's where this journey begins. Have you ever said something honest, genuinely honest, and watched the entire room go quiet? Not because you were rude, not because you were wrong, but because you said what no one else was willing to say out loud? That silence isn't awkward. It's revealing. It shows you just how fragile the surface truly is. Carl Jung believed that the deeper you go into your own psyche, the more disconnected you'll feel from the world, not because you're damaged, but because the world is addicted to illusion. It rewards masks. It applauds those who conform, nod politely, and never ask why. And when you speak the truth, even gently, it's like tossing a rock into still water. Ripples form, faces shift, conversations turn stiff. Here's the uncomfortable truth. The more self-aware you become, the more uncomfortable you'll make those who aren't. People say they want authenticity, but most only want it if it doesn't disrupt the script. Because real awareness, it breaks the rhythm. It challenges the roles. It forces people to confront parts of themselves they've spent years avoiding. So, if you felt like an outsider, not because you're antisocial, but because you refuse to lie to yourself, you're not alone. You've just stepped out of the performance. And that performance is everywhere, at work, in relationships, even in the mirror sometimes. But deep thinkers, we can't pretend. We weren't built for illusion. We were built to feel, to question, to awaken. So yes, awareness is alienating. But maybe that's the price of seeing clearly in a world that prefers to stay blind. No one tells you this when you're young, but being self-aware doesn't make life easier. In fact, the more you awaken, the more you begin to suffer, not because you're broken, but because the world around you refuses to wake up with you. Carl Jung warned us, true awareness in an unconscious society is not a gift, it's a burden. From early childhood, deep thinkers feel it. You ask questions other kids don't. You see through the rules, the roles, the empty praise, and instead of encouragement, you hear things like, don't ask so much, or just do what you're told. So you stop speaking out loud, but the questions, they never stop. They just go inward. By the time you reach adulthood, you've built a universe inside you full of truth, contradiction, depth, and wonder. But in the real world, you're told to shrink it. You're told you're too intense, too emotional, too philosophical. And here's the paradox. No one wants to admit, the deeper your truth, the lonelier your path becomes. Society fears what it doesn't understand, and deep thinkers, those who feel deeply, ask fearlessly, and refuse to pretend, become walking disruptions. Not because they're trying to be, but because their presence alone unmasks the illusions others cling to. Jung once said, "The more intelligent and self-aware a person is, the more they suffer from the unconsciousness of society." That's not romantic. It's a warning. You are not cursed for seeing the world clearly, but you will be punished for not looking away. So the real question is, will you trade your truth for comfort, or will you carry it even if no one claps? You ever notice how when you speak from a place of depth, people look at you like you're trying to show off, as if truth has become some kind of ego trip? But here's the thing, they're not really reacting to you. They're reacting to what you reflect. When you speak the truth, especially a painful one, it doesn't land on neutral ground. It lands on a battlefield of unresolved emotions. And if someone hasn't faced their own, they won't hear what you're saying. They'll hear judgment, they'll hear threat. That's what Carl Jung called the encounter with the shadow. When you hold up a mirror to the parts of people they've buried, the parts they've denied, rejected, or never fully understood, they flinch. And sometimes they attack. This is why people don't push you away because you're wrong. They push you away because you're right and they're not ready for it. You talk about trauma and they say you're being dramatic. You ask a thoughtful question and suddenly you're too intense or overthinking. No, you're not overthinking. You're thinking clearly, deeply. And that clarity, it's rare and often it's misunderstood. When you sit in silence, they assume you're judging them. But what they don't realize is that you're just observing, listening, processing the tension between what's said and what's left unsaid. Jung believed that most people live behind masks. They don't want to face what's underneath. So when someone like you comes along real, awake, unfiltered, they don't know what to do with you. But don't dim your clarity to protect their comfort. Your presence might be uncomfortable, but it's also medicine. And medicine doesn't always taste sweet. Truth is a strange thing. Everyone says they want it until it shows up uninvited, until it breaks the rhythm, until it forces them to see what they've been avoiding. Truth doesn't knock, it crashes. It interrupts the performance. And for those living on the surface who find comfort in routine, in distraction, in noise, truth can feel like an act of violence. Here's what no one wants to admit. Real truth doesn't comfort the crowd, it confronts it. Carl Jung understood this well. He said that most people don't think. They just rearrange their prejudices. They repeat what they've been told. They defend what makes them feel safe. But deep thinkers, we question. Not because we want to be rebellious, but because we can't not question. We hear something and our mind doesn't just accept it, dissects, it wrestles, it digs. And that questioning, it's dangerous. Not to you, but to those who build their identity around illusion. Have you ever told someone the truth they needed to hear and watched them run from you? Not because you were cruel, but because your words shattered their comfort? Jung would call that the trauma of awakening. And once you awaken, something irreversible happens. You stop being able to pretend. Truth has a frequency. Once you vibrate at that level, once you see what's really there, you can't just go back to smiling at small talk or nodding through lies. You lose people. You lose approval. But you gain clarity. And clarity, that's a form of freedom most people aren't ready for. So if truth has cost you relationships, comfort, or peace, don't question your path. You didn't destroy anything. You just stopped participating in the illusion. From the moment you take your first breath, the world starts handing you a script. This is what success looks like. This is how you're supposed to behave. Smile when you're sad. Obey when you're unsure. Don't ask questions, just follow the program. And if you dare to pause and ask, wait, why are we doing this? You're suddenly the problem. You're too emotional, too intense, too much. But Carl Jung had a different take. He called this phenomenon mass-mindedness of state, where most people don't think for themselves. They don't question the rules. They just absorb whatever the culture feeds them and wear it like a uniform. Here's the raw truth. You weren't raised to be conscious. You were conditioned to be compliant. But what if the version of you that fits in isn't really you at all? That's the crisis many deep thinkers face. Because once you start waking up, really waking up, you can't unsee the programming. You begin to realize how much of your life has been lived on autopilot. You didn't choose the script, you inherited it. And the moment you start rewriting it, the world resists. Your family calls you distant. Friends say you've changed, but Jung would say you haven't changed. You've just started thinking for yourself. Awareness is inconvenient to a culture that thrives on blind repetition. But don't mistake that pushback for failure. It's proof you're no longer asleep. So if you've ever been told you're too much, too deep, too different Pauls, you're not too anything. You're just awake. And in a world that's been trained to sleep, awakening is always an act of rebellion. Think back to your earliest memories of school. Do you remember being rewarded for asking deep questions, for exploring your feelings, for wondering about life, death, or meaning? Or were you praised for sitting still, for coloring inside the lines, for giving the right answer without ever asking why it mattered? From the very beginning, most of us are trained to conform, not to think. Carl Jung once said that the soul needs silence, reflection, and shadow work to grow. But the modern education system offers none of that. Instead, it offers bells, schedules, standardized tests, and a curriculum designed not to awaken but to condition. School doesn't prepare you to know yourself. It prepares you to obey. You're told what success looks like, how to act, when to speak, but never how to listen to your own inner voice. And slowly, quietly, you stop trusting that voice. This is the first cage, and it's made of invisible bars. Approval, repetition, control. We don't call it that, of course. We call it discipline, structure, achievement. But really, it's fear. Fear of what happens when a child becomes truly alive. Fear of the unknown questions. Fear of depth. And so, many of us grow up learning to perform instead of think, to memorize instead of reflect, to achieve instead of feel. But here's the tragedy. By the time we start asking real questions, the system has already taught us to silence them. So if you've ever felt like you were too curious, too emotional, or just too much in the classroom, it's not because you failed the system. It's because the system was never built to handle someone like you. In today's world, we celebrate speed over stillness. We reward appearance over substance. And in almost every corner of modern life, depth is quietly feared. Look at dating. People swipe on photos, not souls. Conversations skim the surface. What do you do? What's your type? But ask, what do you fear? Or what shaped your beliefs? And watch the room grow tense. At work, it's the same. Status, output, appearance. We're taught to chase titles, not, meaning perform, not reflect. And in everyday life, there's always a push to keep moving. Faster, busier, louder. But here's what no one wants to admit. Stillness is threatening when you've spent your life running from yourself. Carl Jung believed that the soul doesn't thrive in noise. It grows in silence, in introspection, in shadow. But a society disconnected from soul will always fear those who live in alignment with theirs. That's why deep thinkers make people uncomfortable without saying a word. It's not the words you speak. It's the stillness you carry. The gaze that doesn't just look but sees. And for someone who spent years hiding behind masks, being seen feels like exposure, like danger, like truth knocking too loudly on a door they've tried to keep shut. You become a mirror. And people don't always thank mirrors for what they reveal. So if you've ever felt resistance when you showed up as your full self, it's not because there's something wrong with you. It's because your presence says, I see you. And not everyone is ready to be seen. There's a kind of loneliness that has nothing to do with being alone. It's when you're in a room full of people but can't speak what's really on your mind. It's when your soul is on fire with meaning, but all the world wants is small talk. Carl Jung once said, loneliness does not come from being alone, but from being unable to communicate things that seem important. And if you're a deep thinker, you've felt that truth in your bones. You've dulled your voice just to be heard. You've watered down your feelings so they wouldn't overwhelm someone else. You've withheld truths not because you didn't want to share them, but because you knew they couldn't hold them. And here's the real tragedy: when you shrink yourself for connection, you don't end up feeling understood, you just end up feeling invisible. So many of us men and women with depth end up playing roles in conversations just to survive. Laughing when it's empty, nodding when we're confused, smiling, even when something inside us is quietly breaking. But Jung warned, conformity may win you comfort, but it costs you your soul. Because when you pretend for too long, something sacred inside you begins to go quiet. Not gone, just quiet. Like a voice, waiting for permission to speak again. So if you've ever asked, why do I feel so alone even when I'm surrounded? It's not because you're broken. It's because you were born to speak truths this world hasn't learned how to hear yet. Stay conscious, even when it hurts. Because pretending will never heal what only truth can set free. There's a kind of tired that sleep can't fix. You're not physically exhausted. You're not worn out from lifting or running. You're drained because, without even realizing it, you've been carrying emotions that don't belong to you. Carl Jung called this projection when others unconsciously place their fears, wounds, and unresolved shadows onto someone else. And if you're the calm one, the empathic one, the one who listens without judgment, that someone is probably you. You walk into a room and feel the tension before a single word is spoken. You listen to someone speak, and somehow you hear the sadness behind their smile. You give, you hold space, you help, and by the end of the conversation, they feel lighter while you feel like the air's been sucked out of your lungs. You become everyone's safe space until you realize you no longer feel safe in your own mind. This is what Jung called unconscious vampirism. It's not malicious, it's not even intentional, but it's real. And it's costly. Because when you're constantly absorbing the weight of others, your own voice gets quieter, your own needs get blurry. Your identity begins to dissolve under the weight of silent expectations. You're the strong one, the grounded one, the one who has it all together. But no one sees how much you're holding inside. And here's the hard truth. The world won't thank you for carrying what it refuses to deal with. It'll just keep asking for more until you disappear into the role you've been forced to play. So if you're exhausted, it doesn't mean you're weak. It means you're absorbing more than you were ever meant to carry. It's not your job to be everyone's shelter. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is to choose yourself first. Let's talk about something that rarely gets acknowledged: the silent way the world drains those who feel deeply. If you're a deep thinker, an empath, a calm presence in chaotic rooms, then you already know this. People are drawn to you, to your steadiness, your insight, your ability to hold space without judgment. But here's the unspoken cost. They take your calm, they take your clarity, and they almost never give it back. You become their anchor, their therapist, their emotional compass. And when you finally set a boundary, when you say, I need space, or I can't carry this right now, they don't say thank you. They call you cold, distant, selfish. But here's the truth: no one sees. Your silence isn't rejection, it's survival. Carl Jung understood this deeply. He believed that those who awaken in an unconscious society aren't just misunderstood, they're used. Their energy becomes a resource others extract. And it's subtle, it's not dramatic. There are no arguments, no obvious betrayals, just little moments, requests, confessions, expectations layered on you until one day you realize you've become a lifeboat for people who never learned to swim. And while they float peacefully on your strength, you're the one sinking underneath. So if you've pulled back, you're not being dramatic. You're reclaiming yourself. You're allowed to disconnect, not to punish, but to protect. Because you can't be a source of light for others if your own flame keeps getting blown out. Have you ever noticed how exhausting it is just to exist in today's world? Not physically, mentally, spiritually. Everywhere you turn your phone, your TV, even a walk down the street, there's another message whispering, you're not enough. Buy this, Fix that. Be more. Do more. Look better. For most people, it's background noise. They scroll right past it. But for deep thinkers, it's never just noise. We don't just see the message. We feel it. We deconstruct it. We ask, what's the motive? What's the cost? What's the truth behind the image? And that kind of constant mental processing, it's draining. It wears on your nervous system. It leaves you overstimulated, but undernourished. This world doesn't just want your attention. It wants your identity sold back to you through algorithms and illusion. Carl Jung warned us about this. He believed that the collective unconscious shapes culture more than logic does. And what we're living in right now is a culture afraid of depth. Why? Because depth leads to questioning, and questioning threatens systems built on compliance. So everything around you, media, marketing, even wellness trends, are designed to keep you distracted, to keep you scrolling, consuming, doubting yourself. But here's the truth, they don't sell. You're not broken, you're just aware. And in a system engineered to numb the mind, awareness becomes a burden. So if you feel mentally exhausted all the time, you're not weak. You're awake in a world that profits off your disconnection. And that clarity, it might make you tired, but it also makes you free. You ever feel like the world punishes you for feeling too much? In school, they called you distracted. Not because you didn't care, but because your mind was somewhere deeper asking questions no one around you wanted to hear. At work, they call you unproductive. Not because you're lazy, but because you need your work to mean something. You're not there to just tick boxes. You're there to build something real. And in relationships, you're too intense, too deep, too much. But what they really mean is you're honest. You don't fake affection. You don't play the game. In a world that values masks, feeling deeply is treated like a flaw, when in truth, it's your greatest form of intelligence. Carl Jung said, "Who looks outside, dreams. Who looks inside, awakes." But what he didn't sugarcoat is this: awakening doesn't come with applause. It often comes with isolation. Because when you stop performing, when you strip away the masks, people don't always thank you for it. They label you, push you away, misunderstand you. Why? Because you remind them of something they've buried. You reflect the part of them that still longs to feel deeply, but doesn't know how anymore. And in a culture built on productivity and pretending, authenticity becomes a radical act. Being real becomes resistance. So if you've ever been made to feel like your depth is a burden, hear this. You weren't born to perform. You were born to feel, to awaken. And yes, that path is lonely, but it's also the only one that's real. You may not see them, but they're out there. Others like you, quiet souls, deep minds, people who observe more than they speak, who feel more than they show, the ones who've always felt different. And maybe, like you, they've been told to quiet down, to soften the truth, to fit in just a little more, but they couldn't, not really. Because once you see through the world's illusions, pretending becomes impossible. Carl Jung understood this. He said that the moment you begin to question the system around you, your culture, your identity, your beliefs, that moment is not a breakdown. It's a beginning. What if the thing that made you feel isolated is actually the key to finding your tribe? Because something powerful happens when two deep thinkers cross paths. It's like the soul exhales, the walls fall, and for a moment, you don't feel like a stranger on this planet. The illusion cracks, the masks drop, and the conversation finally becomes real. So don't shut yourself down just to be accepted. Don't numb your vision so the world feels more comfortable around you. You weren't meant to blend in. You were meant to wake others up simply by being true to yourself. And while the path of depth can be lonely, it's never empty. Because when you stay honest, when you stay open, the right people find you. Not the many, but the few who matter. Some people are born restless not for adventure, but for truth. They can't settle for illusions. They can't unsee the cracks in the system or pretend to be okay when they're not. If that's you, You were never meant to live on the surface. Carl Jung believed that every human being carries a psychological task, a sacred responsibility tied to their inner nature. And the deeper the thinker, the heavier the task. Not in weight, but in meaning. Because while most are satisfied with answers handed to them, you ask the next question. While others seek validation, you seek integration. While the world avoids the shadow, you face it again and again. You were never too much. You were just born for a task most people spend their lives running from. And yes, that task is uncomfortable. It doesn't come with a map. There are no awards, no cheering crowds, no clear finish line, just you, walking forward with a torch, often through darkness no one else wants to enter. But there's something powerful about that emptiness you sometimes feel. It's not failure, it's space. Space for something sacred to emerge. Jung would say that this is where transformation begins, not by becoming something new, but by shedding what was never you to begin with. So if you've ever wondered why you don't fit, why you feel things so deeply, or why silence sometimes feels more like home than noise, it's not a flaw. It's a calling. And once you honor it, your life begins to make sense in a way the world was never designed to explain. Let's get one thing straight. You were never meant to be liked by everyone. And deep down, you've always known that. You weren't born to be the most agreeable, the most palatable, or the most popular. You were born to be true. And the truth, it doesn't always get applause. Carl Jung believed that certain people, those who carry depth, who wrestle with the shadow, who refuse to live asleep, aren't here to fit in. They're here to awaken. Not the masses, but the few, the ones who are ready. So if you've ever been told you're too much, maybe it's because you're too real for a world built on pretending. And that can feel lonely until you realize solitude isn't the same as loneliness. Solitude is the moment you finally see yourself clearly, quietly, without distortion. It's when you stop chasing validation and start anchoring into your own truth. There's freedom in that, because once you stop needing to be liked, you stop bending yourself into shapes that were never yours to begin with. Jung said that embracing your inner complexity isn't weakness, it's medicine. Not loud medicine, not something you market or sell, but the kind that heals through presence, through honesty, through simply being. You don't have to convince anyone. You don't have to over-explain. You just have to stay awake. Because your truth, lived out fully and unapologetically, will reach the right hearts. Not many, but enough. You are not here to blend in. You are the mirror, the truth teller, the soul who dares to ask the questions most people spend their whole lives avoiding. You feel what others suppress. You say what others fear. You carry a frequency that shakes loose everything artificial around you. And yes, that makes you different, but it also makes you necessary. Carl Jung believed that it's not the powerful, the wealthy, or the loud who transform the world, it's the conscious. Those brave enough to look inward then walk back into the world carrying what they found. So stop asking for permission to be real. Stop waiting to be understood by a world that's terrified of truth. Don't filter yourself to make others comfortable. Don't shrink to keep their peace. You are not too much. You are just awake. And that's a hard thing to be in a culture that thrives on pretending. But it's also what this world is starving for, even if it doesn't know it yet. So value yourself so deeply that others are forced to rise or quietly leave. And both outcomes are perfectly okay. Because deep thinking isn't about being liked. It's about being true. To your mind, to your soul, to the reason you're here. So if these words echoed something unspoken inside you, like this video. Comment with just one word that describes how you truly feel right now. Subscribe if you're tired of performing and ready to live fully awake. This space was made for you, for the ones who feel too much, think too deeply, and still refuse to give up on truth. You are the light in a world still learning how to see.